that, I'll hand over to Mark first to present. And I know that we're all relying on Teams for teamwork at this point, but we also have platforms like Yammer that I think are also quite important. But I'll leave that part of the presentation to Mark. So I'll hand over now.
Emily, and sorry, Mark, for interrupting. I'm just going to record this as well so we can share it later so everyone
great.
knows.
And also we have Sharon on the call. I didn't officially introduce Sharon too.
No worries.
Okay, well, thanks for joining, everyone. This is an unusual business user group. The first one we've actually had we've got business user groups for Office 365 going in Sydney and Melbourne, very active communities, but this is the first time that we've actually done one virtually. We are trying to do a similar sort of format for those that are used to coming to the physical non-isolation events in Sydney and Melbourne, where we actually have a bit of panel of experts, and we very much like the interaction of having questions and insights. So please feel free to pop a few things in the comments section as we go, probably, and Emily can and Sharon will be running the questions a bit later. So this is welcome to our first business user group in the COVID world. I'm going to kick off. I'm Office 365 evangelist with Engage Squared, and I just want to share a few slides. Give me a second. And for those that don't know Engage Squared, we're a Microsoft partner. We do digital workplaces, which are super important in this days of COVID, business applications, document management, and I'm in the change and adoption team, which is quite an active team. We work across the Office 365 suite, so I'll have a bit of a bias, as people know me from being a Yammer CSM in the day, do a lot of work with Teams, etc. We've got a couple of our own products like Board Connect, an Internet Accelerator. And to start with, I just want to talk what life was like for me in that period, like 5 weeks ago, when we sort of the COVID-19 sort of hit. I was very lucky to go over to Western Australia to work with St John Ambulance. And those people will know this character here, Matt Dodd, who's now one of our team. He was with Bank West. It was a really good example of what's actually happening organisationally, because went to help St John launch Yammer so that their ambulance staff across Western Australia could actually have a two-way communication, very rapid at scale, community-based platform, which we intended to launch. Usual launch we do a sort of discovery phase and build communities over 7 weeks, but with COVID-19 sort of happening, this collapsed down to 7 days. So it was very much, and I think all organisations are doing this, what they had in the pipeline in terms of saying we needed Yammer, and we wanted to launch Teams, and St John's Ambulance was dealing with cruise ships, a whole range of things to do with COVID, and they needed to get information out fast. So I worked with them and Matt for a week, and we actually, so that's the sort of new normal: be agile, launch something, work it out as you go, with what you've got in place. And in this case, we had a plan in sort of place. And we just launched. So the first community that we launched was a COVID-19 community for information for ambulance staff. So that became a great use case in itself. By the time I flew back, I'm sure it wasn't because of me, but they closed the Western Australian border. They closed the Western Australian border. So literally, we've been doing everything virtually since, and it's had great uptake. So welcome to the new world, and I know that's happening organisationally. That's that's changed the way we do teamwork. Before, teamwork was employee engagement was super important for teams in the normal world. So highly engaged teams were a lot higher performers. Working as successful teams, you also can work from anywhere, as we all know, and you sort of build up your diverse workforce and give everyone a chance to contribute. I think this has really been accelerated. So the traditional way of, and this when we talk about SWOOP analytics, this is one of the things they've looked at for SWOOP for teams, is teams normally form, get sorted, then they start to normalize, and then they really perform. A lot of people now have to get to this high performance really quickly, and it's been a bit, to be honest, it's been a bit confusing. So, you know, when you're working with your teams, we've in the last few weeks working out our tools we're using, and I'll talk about that in a sec. It's really important, I think, to go back to some of those core things around what's effective work in teams. It's even more important because we can't get all organizations having town halls or having people walk the floor or have your regular face-to-face meetings. So trust in your online platforms becomes super important, open forms of communication, and when you're forming groups, sense of purpose. And I'll talk about continuous learning as well, which is super important. I refer you to really good book and presentation we've had at a former BUG with Dermot Crowley called Smart Work. And for individual players, I think this is really, so you as individuals, I think the really important thing is, again, purpose becomes super important. Mindfulness is really important for yourself to get through this period, and I'm sure that a lot more people are doing yoga. I certainly am doing more meditation of late. I think we need it, and it's being mindful of behaviours of others, and that's a little bit hard sometimes online. You still need a routine, and so being on time at meetings, and that's something that builds trust with your teammates, and being reliable still, even though we're working from home primarily, or we're working with some people in operational areas like St. John, then reliability is super important and a little bit difficult in this new environment. In terms of tools, I'm not a great one to sort of say the which tool when is a critical piece, because I think ultimately users need to work out what works for them. But organizationally, it's really important to work out what tools you're using. We're obviously on Teams now. In Engage, we use Teams as a hub for our teamwork. But you know, to do organizationally, to do work across the organization, tools like Yammer and become super important, I think, because they become the place where some of that community spirit is still built, that the ability to share things with people outside your immediate team becomes super important. And there's obviously intranets. In this case, we've worked with banks, but there's obviously different forms of intranets with SharePoint. And so I won't go into it, but I can tell you that new Yammer has just been launched on the mobile and is gradually being brought out to organizations that are actually using, with lots of great new features, and its usage has gone up. If you talk to Angus Florence, and the Yammer team has gone up exponentially in the last, was actually climbing anyway, but has actually climbed tremendously in the last 5 or 6 weeks. And for those that think that they compete with each other, Yammer has had a sort of a doubling of its uptake since Teams has been around. So there's they're very much complementary, and I've got a little trick for you shortly. In terms of how we learn, I think we've just got to remember that the most important way we actually learn in terms of effectiveness, and you might not be able to see everything on this slide, but in terms of effectiveness is learning from your co-workers. So working out the structure of your teams and how you can do professional development and support each other in these times becomes super important, because the reality is that's what's you're more successful and highly effective if you can learn from others through champions groups, through community, through doing things like we're doing today, as opposed to purely just trial and error by yourself. I think it's a really good opportunity to be curious, and this is actually my cat Chia, and Chia was very curious as to we've been doing some painting over the Easter weekend, and she was very curious as to what was we painted behind a cupboard that she likes to explore. So she caught her at the top of the stairs. Of course, we had to bring her down because she couldn't get down herself. But like Chia, I think it's a really good opportunity with online platforms and digital working and working with teams to try new things, whether it's doing social catch-ups with multiple people on Zoom or Teams, or actually experimenting, really getting a deeper dive into the digital tools that you're doing, because we're all now become digital natives by our very nature. Everything is sort of digital these days, and there's always a lot of things to explore, especially in Office 365. This is my thing of the week. I was super excited that the Yammer app for Teams has actually been launched. So if you haven't got it on your Teams and you have a Yammer group, you need to go and search under apps for communities. Don't search for Yammer. It's actually called communities, which is the way that Microsoft is sort of balancing the two apps, and then pin it. And this is a snapshot of my team. So you can just launch your whole Yammer experience while you're actually in Teams, which is an example where you can actually bring your digital world together a little bit more integrated. And being a Yammer guy, I just love that. So have a go. And of course, this is giving a little bit indication of my world when we've got Petched, Engage, and COVID communications as two of and the Australian Customer Connection Group are three of the top groups that I'm actually looking at the moment. And have some fun. So this is, you can see we're very serious at Engage when we have our management and squad catch-ups. But I think what we do know about running remote teams, and I've run them in the past, don't need to do everything formally. You need a little bit of time to actually check in how people are going, and let them and let people have a bit of fun. That is a super important sort of team care thing to be doing. There is an indication that managers set up more of the meetings in this day and age. So be aware of that. If you're the manager that's actually setting up meetings, or a leader, that you actually encourage others to set their own meetings, and also give them some space to actually check in how they're going, or use the backgrounds that people use. And Tom had fun in his aquarium, as you can see. To finish, we at Engage, we're doing a survival kit for working at home, which is it's about to be hot off the press. So we will actually, as a follow-up to this, we'll get it all to you. And we are running a series of webinars fortnightly. So the next one is with Dermot Crowley. So we will put it in we will let you know about that for next week in the follow-up as well, and encourage you to join those and check out the kit, which has got a lot more detail of some of the things I've been talking about. For example, sort of setting some house rules about how you want to work as a team is a super important tip. Organising your channels, organising your workspaces and technology use becomes super important. So if you want to become a dream team, then this is one of the things that you can use. I will escape that and have a hand over back to you, Emily.
Yes, okay, thanks, Mark. So next up, we're going to hear from Laurie from SWOOP Analytics. So Laurie's our Chief Data Scientist over at SWOOP, and he's really had the opportunity to crunch the numbers and have a look at some of the insights available for the way that other organisations are using Microsoft Teams at the moment. And of course, we released our, the world's first and our first ever benchmarking report for Microsoft Teams, which we're really excited about. So Laurie's also going to chat through some of the key findings that were in that report, but we do certainly recommend that you download the full report so you can really deep dive into some of the insights there. And there's also some fantastic contributions there as well from our partners, of course, from Engage Squared and Adopt&Embrace, who are on our call today as well. So I'll hand over to Laurie now to chat through some of those.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Yeah, let me just I've got a few slides, not too many, because I don't want to overload you with all of this, but because I warn you, it's an 89 page or something like that, Sharon, is that right, sort of report? So it's not something you knock over in a short session, but I'm going to give you just let me know if things are showing up on the screen in the right order. Is that happening?
Yep, looks good, Laurie.
Yep.
Maybe if you just go to a full page.
Yep. Okay. So those of you that don't know about SWOOP, I mean, we've been going for about 5 years now, a bit over 5 years, and we started with Yammer. But what we do is we do relationship analytics by if you like, looking at the interaction patterns in real time from your Yammer or your Teams network or Workplace by Facebook, and we feed that back to you in a dashboard. Now, I must say, at 3 levels. So to the individual level, to the group or team level, and through to the enterprise level. But because we're actually capturing this data, we also have got into the habit of running what we call our benchmarking reports. And this is where we anonymously compare all of the people that have used SWOOP, either with Yammer or Teams or Workplace by Facebook. We compare them anonymously so that we can see what the patterns of good performance is. And then when we identify what good performance is, especially at the teams or group level, we'll go back to organisations and say, look, our analytics says that these teams or these groups are really high-performing groups. We, as SWOOP, don't capture the context of the team, their names or their leaders or their members or what have you. We've just got IDs. But we can give them that information, and they come back and tell us about what these teams are doing or groups are doing and so forth. And the idea with benchmarking is that you identify what good is, who's performing well, find out what they're doing in performing well, and you feed that back to the rest of the organisation. In our case, it's to the industry, if you like, about what things are working well for you. So our most recent report was with Teams, and I must say that it's now out of date because the data today is an awful lot different to the data at the end of 2019 when we looked at something like, I think it was 12 weeks worth of data from over 5,000 teams across 15 organisations, and 2 of those organisations are on the call today. And we have to say, a call out to Paul from Adopt&Embrace, who was actually our first victim. So he was the one that was brave enough to open up their Teams site for us to practice with. So we're indebted to Paul for that. And now, of course, we're getting an awful lot of calls about analysing Teams, as you'd expect. So, but anyway, I guess the first thing we found was that when you look at Teams, the product, it's actually like 3 products, right? So, and they're not particularly connected all that well. So you've got your chat, you've got your meetings, and you've got your team channels, right? And so now we actually focus on the team channels because we're focused on the teams. It turns out that chat isn't actually aligned with Teams. Chat is just another social network, if you like, a very emergent one. In fact, the most active one. In fact, we found out that the chat, in terms of messages, was something between 70 and 90% of messages in organisations is in chat. But we think the most important interactions are in the team channels, because that's where things are kept and you can go back and look at them and so forth, and they're more ordered that sort of way. Meetings can be held within channels, but largely they're separate as well. And the sort of thing we're seeing is that as people come into the Teams environment, they're actually bringing what they did in the past in. So if you were a Skype user or an Outlook sort of meetings sort of user, you will come in and use the actual meetings and chats part. If you're coming from a SharePoint or from a Yammer sort of space into Teams, you'll be more familiar with the threaded discussions. Not to say you won't use chat, but you'll go to those places because they're familiar. So we started describing sort of Teams as like a luxury immigration camp, like the Ellis Island and digital Ellis Island, if you like, where a lot of people are coming in using Teams for things that they're used to using, but not yet discovering what the other things are. Right? So that's sort of like largely the stages that we're seeing. We also found that when you looking at the team levels, some teams were doing spectacularly well. The majority of teams, well, over 60% of the teams weren't really that active at all, less than an interaction a week, which largely tells us they're either just experimental, people are just gone on and just have play, or they may be real teams, digital teams, but they're a face-to-face team that only use the digital space very infrequently. But largely that was 60% of the teams. But when with best practices, with benchmarking, we look for the exceptional teams, the exemplars, if you like, and what we were looking for was what were those exemplars, and we found many, if you like. And when we started to go back to the organisations to ask, well, what are these exemplar teams doing? We found some pretty interesting themes. And I think something that you would expect is that all of the exemplars had some component of virtual in what they were doing. So one of the exemplars was organisations that are large organisations that are globally sort of monitoring something. And our most active team was monitoring security threats. And the people in that team, I think there was something like I think it was 25 members, which was quite a large team, but on average, they were posting something in the Teams thread every 14 minutes of their day. And of course, they're doing this around the world and around the clock. So they have to put something in the Teams thread so that somebody waking up in another part of the world can pick that up and carry on the sort of work. So that was, and we saw a number of other teams, high-performing teams with a similar global surveillance sort of context, like. The other one, which was very common, was what we're calling the onshore-offshore context. So many large organisations now have an offshore working environment. It's not always now just outsourcing, if you like, repetitive tasks. It's actually just sharing the work around the globe, if you like, so they can work around the clock. Now, often those offshore teams don't actually have access to the same digital resources that the onshore team has for whatever reason. So these teams are set up so that they can actually work more effectively globally, and the onshore team is helping the offshore team and vice versa. And we have a little case study about one of those that Sharon will talk to later. The third sort of common use case was around global rollouts, global change rollouts. So if there was a new, like Office 365, for example, if the organisation is rolling that out across the whole organisation, and they're a large organisation, well, that's going to be something that, something like Teams is really made for, so that you can start to engage in change right from the shop floor up through to the executive, and that's something we saw quite common. And the other one that we saw that was sort of emerging, especially for the smaller organisations, was the use of Teams to actually use of the external Teams function within Teams, where organisations, say consulting companies, could actually form teams with their customers or their suppliers or their partners and execute a project where you actually had shared members in a shared team. Now, I must say that most of the larger organisations we spoke to actually block that function, and that's one of the worst practices we'll go into later. But in essence, we saw that there was a real leverage there when you can actually have a workspace that you're actually sharing with your client for both sides. The provider can bring all of their expertise to the project, and also the customer can actually share the outcomes as they're happening to the broader organisation. So I think that's something that's going to be a real powerful thing for teams. Once we can get through some of the governance sort of issues. The other thing that you need to be aware of, I'm sure you are, is that, teams aren't really teams, right? So when we looked at teams and how big they were, and we found that not just with teams, but also with Workplace and any tool that says they're a team tool, digital teams tend to be bigger than they need to be, right? So, and they're not all used for what we would typically relate to as if you like, a real life team or a working team, if you like. So typically, if you think about your team at work, the people that you interact with every day, there's likely to be, less than 7 or 8 or 9 of those, more likely 3 or 4 people that you would interact and call your team. What we found was that, only about 20% of the teams we looked at would fall anywhere close to that. And we broke those up into single leader and self-directed teams. Those that were bigger than that, we classified into forums or communities. And you can see the little sort of icons on the right that reflect the relationship patterns that we sort of analysed to characterise these. So we did this was data driven. So we're basically using the interaction data that we collected, and we ran statistical techniques across them to cluster to find out how many clusters of usage there were, and we found that there were largely 5. And these were the 4 here. Plus there's a big one we call disconnected, and 61% of those were those inactive teams that look largely disconnected. Now, I think why this is out of date, I think that number wouldn't be 61% today, and we're certainly doing something about that sort of right now. So the other parts of the report that quickly, in terms of the Yammer versus Teams, this is a very important and popular topic. We've looked at it from the perspective of culture and looking at culture mapping, and in the report we go through that in a little bit of detail. But in essence, what we're sort of saying is that really Yammer and Teams play in different cultural spaces. Even though the features might overlap 90%, people don't feel and think that way. The people that know how to use these tools well, it's very clear to them. And Sharon will talk to that a little bit later. Other parts of the report, this is something our customers were asking, how much is Teams actually being used as a hub? In other words, how many applications are being brought into Teams or through Teams to work with? Mark's already just mentioned that Yammer is actually being added onto the side, so it's got a privileged position, but most applications come through tabs that are added to channels. So we did a tabs analysis, and we found that about 70% of the teams had actually added a tab, which means that they had thought about customizing their workplace. The most popular one was Excel, right? And that was followed probably half as much with Planner and SharePoint, so they were about equal. Most of the customization was bringing other Office 365 or now Microsoft 365 applications into the team space. I guess the most common non-Microsoft things brought in were PDFs and websites. So, I think there's a little bit in there on people analytics, looking at potential for overload. Some of you now have probably experienced a bit of collaborative digital overload. Will we talk a little bit about that and how we can identify that through analytics? This is an idea I guess we had for this report. Typically, we write what are the best practices in our reports. This time we thought, why don't we sort of ask our partners rather than our customers, and 2 of them are on the call today. We had 4 others in the US and the UK. So we had quite a lot of partners, and these are people that are implementing Teams and Yammer and Microsoft 365 applications in their clients' workplaces, helping them. So this is not something that is something that we can sort of identify analytically, but we don't know the full context. So we asked them, first of all, to nominate what they saw with their customers that they would identify as worst practices. In other words, things that if they continued to do them, it would have a bad outcome in the long term. And of course, you can infer what a best practice is from that anyway. But I must say, we've got some very, very good feedback about this because, they said people really resonated with this idea of what are the worst practices. Now, I'm going through just a few of them here, and we've sort of grouped them a little bit. And the first couple you can see, they really have a go at IT, I guess, in some sort of ways. To be fair to the IT organisation, it's not something they're necessarily looking to control, but by default, without any other leadership stepping in to say, we want to take ownership of this, it becomes an IT thing. So, if you rely on the IT team to do the rollout, Teams is just another tool, right? Which means that, they want to roll it out incrementally. They want everybody to be trained in the functions. They'll over-formalise it. They'll over-structure it. When they're asked, what, as one of the first questions is, what should we form as a team? The IT department will say, why don't you just line it with the formal organisation, because that makes it very easy, because the directory will work for both of you and all that sort of stuff. These are seen as very bad things to do. And so, because in essence, and the third point talks to the same one as well, creating teams that just, align with your formal structure. It's not that it's a terribly bad idea to do fast, but if that's the way you feel you're going to run teams, it is a bad idea. So what we've said in the report is that if you want to do that because you think you can get some efficiencies from just running a digital team in a business as usual teams, well, yeah, I guess you can do that. But if you want to get the full power of teams, it's when they more organically grow across the formal lines of business. And I think, the consultants on the call could talk to this at length. So the fourth one there was senior executives, in thinking that the senior executives should lead the change to using Teams. Now, thankfully today we don't have to rely on that because you don't have a choice, right? So, but nevertheless, this is something that works very well with Yammer. We've viewed that with Teams, it's actually the opposite. It's actually working level people working with teams, finding out what works, and then sharing their practices and so forth. And then the final one I often label, the Thermomix argument, like once you have this gadget, you can throw out all the other gadgets in your cupboard and just use one, right? So there's certainly a view out there that with Teams, we don't need Yammer and SharePoint and OneNote and all the others anymore. We'll just do everything in Teams. And clearly in the long run, that can be disastrous. And it's not something that even Microsoft is, they might it's obviously facilitated, but the fact that Teams should be used as a hub and bringing these applications in is certainly the advice. But as I said, there's plenty of people out there that just want to use one tool. So, we can certainly discuss this, and you've got two people on the call that can talk about these in much more detail with much more experience than myself. I wanted to bring you into, as I said, I think our data, which we took from the end of last year, is out of date now. I mean, obviously because people are being forced into working from home. They're being forced into using things like Teams and Yammer and Zoom and whatever else. We did a very quick look at 2 periods with a smaller subset of our benchmarking partners from February, which is basically when people hadn't really got into this whole working from home thing, it was probably up to just a month before Easter. So it's pretty much saying Easter back a month. And I have to sort of thank our co-founder, Marianne Kerr, who was caught up in the being isolated in a hotel for 2 weeks, and she spent those 2 weeks helping me grab some data out of some of these sites that we have. And on average, we found that the activity levels in Teams went up over 200%, and Yammer it was about 70%. So that was the activity levels, the raw activity levels alone. But I think it's insightful to look at the more detailed SWOOP measures beyond simple activity. And the first ones we looked at were just the number of users, how many extra users were brought into the space on both Yammer and Teams, and what percentage of participation did that represent. And then we looked at the two other more detailed measures of engagement and innovation that SWOOP measures. And these are your two-way interactions, which we think is a very strong measure of engagement. That means that if you post something and someone replies to you, and vice versa, then you develop a two-way relationship. If you do that a lot, you have a very strong and potentially more trustful relationship. And we also saw that mentions and tagging people into conversations was another, indicator of engagement. So that was the other measure we put in there. On the innovation front, we measure curiosity, and that's actually the percentage of messages that are framed as questions. And Mark already talked about this whole curiosity thing. That's an important thing. And the final one was diversity, which isn't gender diversity. It's actually diversity of experience that we measure by how many different groups or teams that you're active in. So if you're active in more teams, the chances are that you've got a more diverse experience to bring to your team. And that's we collect that together as innovation. Now, I've plotted the actual the Yammer results and the team's results on the same scale, so you can see the difference. And the plots are the differences, right? So you can see the range of differences is very high in the users and participation on teams, much higher than Yammer. And I think that reflects the sort of time it's taken for some organisations, because this is largely in March, to get to this working from home situation. So some have moved and had, I think one organisation had well, looks like 200-300% sort of rise in the number of users that have come in. Now, the thing to take away from this is that with Teams, you really don't have a choice, right? You can work from home and decide not to use Yammer so much, but as Mark said, people have used it a lot more. But with Teams, you have to use it, right? So it's not a choice virtually. So people have jumped onto Teams in a big way. And what we've seen with the engagement and innovation levels, they've actually gone down. They've gone below zero. With Yammer, they've stayed above, except for the mentions, and I won't go into the detail about that yet because we've got a post on that. But mostly they've still gone up, right? But in Teams, they've actually gone backwards. And that's because, in my view, a lot of people have come to Teams just because they have to be on Teams, and they've got no idea how to engage on Teams yet, and they haven't discovered that yet, at least at this point. What we're planning to do is do these mini benchmarking things now for selected clients that are using both Yammer and Teams over this COVID period, so that we can see whether that engagement picks up and which teams are able to pick up their engagement and what speed. And I think Mark showed the forming, storming, norming and performing sort of curve. This is being compressed, and we want to measure how well some of those teams are actually going up that curve. And then, of course, with our best practice things, interview them, find out what they're doing. So if any of you out there have a Yammer and Teams site, whether you're using SWOOP now or would like to trial it, we're open to sort of talking to organisations and want to measure their performance through this COVID period, because I think this can be very insightful. In fact, I've written a post recently to say I think this is for scientists, this is a very unique period where you can measure how effective is virtual collaboration. You can never get a situation where you can force people not to meet face to face for a period of time, and hopefully this will never happen again. But as a scientist, I think this is a unique period. So I want to hand over now to Sharon, because she's going to talk you through one of our best performing organisations, both on Yammer and Teams, and they have some very interesting stories to tell about what they're doing and what's worked and what hasn't. So let me hand over to Sharon to speak, and I'll leave the slides up.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Laurie. Can I just also add, if anyone is interested in joining Laurie's research with Yammer and Teams, there's no cost involved as well. All we'd ask is just that we could have someone that we can connect to and just dive a little bit deeper into the analytics. So we'd love for you guys to join in if anyone's interested. So anyway, moving on to the best practices. So Laurie sort of touched on best practices. What I wanted to do was show you what a good team looks like, because it's all well and good we talk about, productive work in teams, but what does it actually look like? And as Laurie mentioned, this is a company called Real Foundations. They're a professional real estate services company based in the US, but they're a global company. So professional real estate services, I discovered, is everything from developing huge properties to managing properties. So it's the whole aspect of real estate. So in Dallas, Texas, we have a lovely lady named Naomi Souza. This is her here. She's the Director of Presence and Assets for Real Foundations. So she's based in Dallas, but most of her team is actually based in Chennai in India. this isn't her actual team, but this is some of the team that's in India. So every day they work together on Teams. They start each day with a short post. In this particular team that we're looking at, they have 15 people, which is a little bit more than what Laurie would say is the optimum number of people you'd want in a team. Ideally, you'd want under 10. Each person has just a quick post with the hashtag "what I'm doing today." And they just talk about what they've got planned for the day, what they're picking up off somebody else, following on from. And it's really open communication, really transparent. And Naomi's, she finds it herself, is when she finishes up work for the day in the US, she can quickly, finish up her post of what I'm doing today, and then hand it over to somebody else. And when India wakes up, they can pick it up. So work's done around the clock, very transparent. Everybody knows what everyone's working on. The manager's working in there with everybody else in the team, knowing exactly what's happening, regardless of the geography. So the reason we know that this is a team that is incredibly productive and adds business value is from the benchmarking that we've done. Laura, can you just keep hitting the slides there? Yeah, this is my pop quiz question for you guys. Laurie touched very briefly earlier on the team types, and part of what we've done at SWOOP is within teams, we've broken it down to the 5 team types, which Laurie touched on earlier. So my pop quiz for you is, if you can put in the chat, what sort of team type do you think Naomi's team is? And Laurie, in the meantime, can you just do a quick talk through what's the benefit of all these different team types and what they do?
Yeah, that's a good point, Sharon. I mean, what I found was that, all teams on Teams aren't real teams, right? So, having goals or performance measures, if you're a forum, let's say, or a community of practice, is quite different to if you're a single leader team or a self-directed team. So having a single set of performance measures for teams in general just doesn't really work, right? So you have to know what sort of team you really are before you can start setting goals and performance targets for yourselves. So right now, we actually think this is a very important thing for organizations to know. So when we say that you're behaving like a forum, if you like, but you really want to be a single leader team, then it's pretty clear you need to do something, right? So, but you might want to be a forum, and that's fine. So right now we're even looking at setting up in SWOOP some sort of goals, and we'll say, well, at the moment we're saying that you're a forum, and if you are a forum, this is the sort of goals you should set. But if you really want to be a single leader team, this is the goals for a single leader team. So this is what you need to do to change to become from what you are now to what you want to be. So without doing that, there's no point in setting goals and performance metrics for teams that can vary from 3 people to, in fact, in teams now, 10,000, something like that. So, clearly they're not the same thing. We did have a team with, I think, 4,500. I think the limit was 5,000. It's going up to 10. So yeah, they're quite different propositions.
Well, thanks for everyone who joined the pop quiz. No one actually got this right. So sorry, Rick, sorry, Fiona, sorry, Melina, and sorry, Simon. This team was actually a self-directed team that we were talking about. And the reason being is that everybody's playing a part in it. So, every day, everybody in the team is posting what I'm doing today. Everybody's being transparent about their work. Everybody's contributing to that team. So they actually become the self-directed team, which we would argue for most companies is probably the most aspirational type of team to be. Is that fair, Laurie? That self-directed would be the most aspirational?
If you read the research literature or the Harvard Business Review literature or the McKinsey, when they talk about high-performing teams, they're only talking about self-directed teams, right? They don't write about single leader teams or other sorts of teams. They only write about self-directed teams. So, and I think in today's environment, you don't have a lot of choice. It's hard to be a single leader team when you're all virtual. So I think this envelope's going to get pushed a lot harder in the next few months.
Yeah. So this team, which we're calling what I'm doing today, when we got all the data, obviously it was anonymous. So we had to go back to Real Foundations and back to Naomi and say, well, this was one of the top performing teams. As you saw earlier, we benchmarked 5,300 teams. And so Naomi was pretty chuffed that there was a Real Foundations team amongst those top performers. And then she went and looked at the ID number and came back to us and said, hang on, that's actually my team. And that's how we found out about this particular one. So from 5,300 teams we benchmarked, this was one of the top ones. So just going on to this next slide, the other thing that, well, Laurie mentioned earlier that Real Foundations was one of our top performers in our past 3 Yammer benchmarking reports, and they had some of the top teams in the teams report. So my next question to Naomi was, well, how do you know what tool to use when? And is there a blurred line? I'm sure a lot of you guys have this blurriness as to when do you use Teams, when do you use Yammer, when do you use other tools? So at Real Foundations, Naomi said it was really clear for them. Teams is where they go to do their day-to-day work. So it's where they cancel out the other noise that's going on in the company, and they work together as their team of 15 people. They're very transparent in what they do. Their files are shared on Teams, and they know everybody that they're working with. But when they need to find out a question or share some knowledge that they've gained with the rest of the organisation, that's where they go to Yammer. So Naomi often says, there's always somebody within the organisation, and this isn't a huge organisation, it's about 600 people worldwide, but there's usually somebody who's experienced this issue beforehand or has some knowledge that they can share. So how do you find those people? Well, they do that on Yammer, and she described it as the virtual water cooler, where they go to just ask those questions, to meet other people, tagging other people in, asking questions, and that's how they use Yammer. So the reason we know that this is such a highly productive team is because of this benchmarking. And this is a snapshot of the SWOOP dashboard of Naomi's actual team. So I'm going to hand over to Emily now, and she's just going to walk you through as to show show you, what indicators show that this is such a strong team and a productive team.
So thanks, Sharon. So this will just be a very quick overview of exactly how these insights come to life for Naomi and her team when they're opening up some of the analytics. So this is, it's anonymized data in this particular dashboard at the moment, but it is the same team that Naomi was working in, and you can see that we've got the 15 members that we spoke about before, and we can see very quickly the amount of posting, replying, liking, mentioning that's going on in the team. And of course we briefly just spoke about the team personas and the team types, and you can see over here that this particular What I'm Doing Today team has been identified as the self-directed team, and you can quickly see how that's all calculated by looking at some of these measures here. So we have very low key player dependency. So it looks like, and also you can tell by the network map over here, that there's lots of people interacting with each other, lots of two-way relationships, and there isn't, we're not relying on just one or a few core people to keep this conversation going. Everyone seems to be jumping in and interacting. And of course, the very high two-way relationships percentage there as well would indicate this is quite a high performing agile team, and a very low gallery there as well. And you can see other things here around, the curiosity index, which Laurie spoke about before, how many questions are being asked in these particular teams as well, and also around how often they're mentioning and bringing other people into the conversation too. And another thing that I'll just quickly call out as well would be around the response rate and what that looks like for Naomi's team. So you can see they're quite agile. They're jumping into these conversations within the hour, well, the vast majority of them. And very few of those conversations are happening outside of that 1 hour period. And also there's very few posts that are going without collaboration. So everyone seems to be jumping in, and there's a very low proportion of posts that are receiving no reply or no like. So you can see how this would be a very clear and a great example of a high-performing team, and how you can have a look at some of these analytics to understand that a little bit more in depth. In saying that, I think we've looked into the numbers a lot, and we've been looking at some of the hard-hitting stats. So I might just take the opportunity now to hand over to Paul to have a chat. And I know it's been quite interesting times as well at the moment in terms of the well-being of employees and how that looks like in the environments that we're currently working in. And I'm sure Paul will cover off some of those things just now. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone. I don't know if you feel like I do, but I'm ready for a nap. Like the last 6 weeks, not only in the lives going on around us, but also our work lives have just been, completely overwhelming. And I'll be the first to admit that I've been completely overwhelmed. And there was a weekend there, and I'm sure, many of you have had the same experience as me. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. Scott Morrison giving an update, and like there was tears welling in my eyes just thinking about, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my business? What does it mean for our family? All that kind of stuff. So we've gone through a really, significant point in all of our lives, and it's completely thrown all the papers up in the air again in terms of how we actually think about work, and what does work mean for us as organizations? What does work mean for us as managers? What does work mean for us as individuals, and how do we continue to have some kind of purpose in the work that we do, but also remain level-headed and sane and be able to operate in this world, and recognizing that people had roles that they took for granted just 6 weeks ago that don't have roles now, and there's others that have roles that have completely tripled the amount of workload they've got and everything in between. So all these different relationships and all these different expectations that we've all had in the way that we think about work has completely changed over the last little while. And I think if I look at my crystal ball, I think this event will have an impact on all of us, and it will change the way we think about work moving forward for a long time. And I'm really excited about that. I know it's painful for a lot of us at the moment going through that, but I think once we come out of this situation, come out of what we're facing at the moment, there's a lot more upside than what we had before, I think. And I think fundamentally, I think the thing that most of us have started to realize is that this distributed work thing could actually work. I think a lot of us have worked in organizations where you've had that presenteeism, so like people expecting you to be at the office at 8:30 in the morning, work 3 till 4:36 in the afternoon. You have to be there to do your job. We don't trust you to do your job anymore. I think there's still going to be a little bit of that. There's going to be people out there that think that way, but I think a lot more, and maybe even a majority of the managers or management teams, having been basically forced to go through this process, will start to recognize that distributed work is something that's actually worthwhile, and maybe something that can help our teams and our people achieve better balance in their lives, but also as an organization, really as capitalists, potentially save some money as well. So it could even be a win-win situation for a lot of organizations, a lot of employers, and a lot of employees moving forward. So I think it's pretty exciting. I recognize that you've had death by PowerPoint for the last hour, and I'm going to contribute to that a little bit more. But what I'd love you to do is, if you've got any questions from the last couple of presentations, drop them into the chat now so we can kind of keep track of those questions. And if you've got any questions as I go through this quick run through of some of my thoughts around distributed work, put them in the chat so we can kind of have a good interactive conversation for the last 20 minutes of the user group today. So what I'll do, actually, I saw a meme today on Twitter. I think what I'm supposed to do is say, I'm just going to share my slides now. And then what I'm supposed to say is, right, can everyone see my slides? That's the common language we've all got on every live event or live call we're doing at the moment.
Yes.
So what? That's it. So what I want to do, I just want to share with you again some of these thoughts. I put these thoughts together for Microsoft a couple of weeks ago. We shared it with them. But as a company, Adopt&Embrace, since we started, we've been, we don't call it remote work, we call it distributed work. And there's a real reason why we call it that is because we're not remote from some other place. Like we're all in this together, essentially. I've used that cliche. Oh my goodness, I didn't mean to do that. But the philosophy we have about work is one that we are just distributed. We're not remote from some other location at all. And I want to give you some real world examples about like distributed work and how it actually occurs, and then some quick kind of thoughts on things you could potentially think about or put into place now to help you run your team or be a member of a team that's distributed today as well. So first thing is for us, distributed work is actually part of our values as an organisation. We have 5 values as an organisation, and the last value of the 5 is work is a thing you do, not a place you go. And that's basically baked into our ethos and how we think about hiring and firing staff. So and how we work with customers and all that other kind of stuff. So having this as a core value of our organisation definitely helps put us on the front foot. I recognise that almost every organisation on the call won't have a core value that's related to this, but I think as a team, your team of 5 or your team of 8 or your team of 20 or your department of 100, you can absolutely start thinking about your values in this post-COVID world, and that would be one to potentially think about. Work isn't something where we show up. Its work isn't from 8:30 to 4:36 where I'm sitting at my desk. It's about the output or the outcomes that we get for our customers, whether they're internal or external as well. And geography doesn't need to have an impact on it. I think on the call with everyone on this webinar today, we were kind of joking around last week. I said, cities are just a construct now. Like, it doesn't really matter where you live or where geography is. You have the ability to have an impact from wherever you are in the world. And we've been doing that the last 6 weeks. Like from my garage where I'm sitting right now in Brisbane, engaging with customers around Australia, into Southeast Asia, into the United States, all from the same location, but engaging and delivering value from wherever we are in the world, which just opens up new opportunities for everyone. Some of the things we've put into practice to make this real, like we run all our Christmas parties on Microsoft Teams. We've done this for 3 years in a row, where we get everyone on a call at the same time, irrespective of time zone. So in this case here, this is a couple of years ago when Sonia was in Los Angeles, John's in Perth, Daryl was in Hamilton in New Zealand, and a few of us were in Brisbane. And what we did is not only just have a video call, which we're all, we're sick to death of video calls at the moment because that's all we seem to be on, but we actually tried to create an experience around it. So it wasn't just the video call that we had there. So first of all, we coordinated a experience within Teams where we had a channel in our kind of organization team there called A Very Teams Christmas. We had all the banter in there about the Christmas party. We had gifts and all that kind of stuff, important things about activities we're going to do on the call. But we also used Planner to organize what food we're going to get delivered to each other. So, we use the tabs at the top of the screen there to link to the Uber Eats menu. We get like the food delivered to everyone at the same time. So, John in Western Australia is having a bit of a late morning tea. Sonia in Los Angeles was having a late dinner, but we all could share a meal together in the same thing. So we're using Teams to create an experience to keep the team connected and not just get on a video call from that point of view. Another example recently, some of you know we wrote a book, Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams. We wrote that entire book. We edited that book. We published that book with not a single person meeting face-to-face the entire time. So like the true, I guess, project-based view of distributed work in action. So four co-authors, 2 book editors and coaches across 5 different cities. We had 25 beta readers that worked with us as well. And not one person met the entire face-to-face, the entire 5-month process. So the reason why I share this is I can tell you that it is actually possible to do real effective and efficient work in a distributed way. You don't need to be there face to face, but there's absolutely tips and tactics you can put in place to make sure this works really, really well. For those of you who don't know, it's available on Amazon. Got to get a plug-in for it. We get it paperback on Kindle, and as of yesterday, it's now available on Audible. If you want to listen to my dulcet tones for 4 hours and 27 minutes, you can get it on Audible as well. And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but
Malcolm Turnbull's goes for 21 hours.
No. Crazy.
They're right.
So what we're doing today is we're doing we've shifted to 100% digital delivery. So we're doing this a little bit beforehand, but now we're just 100% doing digital delivery for our customers, and it's working reasonably well. But the thing is, there's some fundamental principles that we think about that's behind all this, right, to make this work. And those 4 principles are. One of the first one is actually really easy at the moment because everyone is remote. But one of the things, even as we come back into the workplace after COVID-19 and kind of lockdowns get relaxed, we need to assume that everyone is remote by default. Right. So the classic symptom we see of this, where people aren't thinking like this, is, and I'm sure everyone has been in a meeting like this before. So say you've got a meeting where there's 5 people in your office, and all those 5 people go into one meeting room and then join via one video camera, and it's kind of pointing at the table with the 5 people sitting around the table. Then you might have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 people joining from a distance as an individual contributor to that event. And almost every time you're in a meeting like that, the people in the room They hold the conversation, they lead the conversation, there's crosstalk across the table, and they don't actually engage with people on the other end of the call. So we made a rule very early on in our organization that said, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what the conversation is, if we're having a meeting about it, everyone joins as an individual participant. So we have an equitable experience for everyone. Even if we're in the same room, you will join as individual participants, not sit behind one webcam and talk that way. And that's made such a huge difference in the way that we interact with each other and gives an equity of voice across the team as well. The second one we think about is we want to create structured unproductivity to be more productive. And there's so many examples of this not going well, and some really good examples of this going well over the last 6 weeks in particular. I think everyone would agree that we've been on more video calls and we're being more overwhelmed with more connection with different people across the team, just because we've tried to take things that happen in the analog world and push them into the digital world very quickly. And we've got back-to-back meetings. We don't have that time to kind of stop and reset before we go on to the next thing. One of the things that we do, and I'd recommend that you do as well, is how do you make sure you're creating this, structuring some unproductivity into your day as a team? Mark had a screenshot of an example of this earlier in his presentation about just taking some time to have a bit of fun on a call, as an example, like using the snap camera to look like you're in a fish tank and all those other kinds of cool things which you can do these days. The things that we specifically do for this, there's a few kind of more formal ones and a few informal ones. So formally, at the start of our team meeting every week, we have 10 minutes on the agenda, which is just everyone in the call tell us what's your number one professional win, your number one personal win for the week. And it just gives a chance for everyone to have a chat, everyone to talk about something they did really well in a work sense, but also, Jeff will tell us what he got done in his garden on the weekend and how he got the orchard back up to where it needed to be. So you get to know more about the people that you're working with as well, and you get a little bit of that water cooler conversation that you might miss out on because we're not in the same location anymore. So structuring that into your team meetings is a really great way to do that. The other things we have, and I'm sure a lot of people have discovered this over the last couple of weeks, we have a weekend wind down, WINE. So 4 o'clock every Friday afternoon, video call, we get on the call, have a beer, have a wine, and just talk rubbish and don't talk work. So we've kind of set that as something that's a regular ritual that we do as a team every week. We also have a call which is a mindfulness moment. It's just 15 minutes on a Wednesday where if you're available, you get on it and we just talk about, some things. Maybe it's the email we got from our employee assistance program. Maybe it's, just things that people are overwhelmed with at the moment, but a chance for people to just let off a little bit of, little bit of pressure off and have a conversation as peers about how we can support each other and care for each other in the way that we work. And those kinds of activities just have a huge impact on the way that we can be effective and productive as contributors to the team. The third principle is we 100% believe that the fewer video calls you participate in, the better. And I'm sure the Teams video call marketing people don't want me to say that, and the Zoom people don't want me to say that, but time and time again, and you would experience this over the last couple of weeks, when you're on more video calls and you're present on more video calls, it drains you more. And if you're on calls where you don't need to be on those calls, you're wasting that energy and that focus that could be applied to something else in your work. I'm sure we've had that experience where I've attended another meeting that could have been an email, or another meeting that could have been a document, or another meeting that could have been a Teams conversation. We don't want to just replace like all those things and that really bad experience we have in meetings today and push them into a video calling world. So the advantage of going asynchronous first, so thinking, how do I communicate this through text? How do I communicate this through a presentation or a document or something like that, means that you can be, it's more effective use of your time, but also more effective use of your team's time as well. And when we talk about this with like CIOs and other members that run committees and things like that, it's interesting. Like the CIO of a Queensland Government Department said to us after we talked about this, he said, this is so amazing because I'm not wasting 90 minutes in every week just being told information that I could have read. And I could have read it at a time that made sense for me. And I didn't want to waste everyone else's time while we're talking about it. So now our meetings are shorter and we're getting through more and we're making more informed decisions because we've got this text-based first view of it before we go into the video call. So asynchronous first, try and do it from a text-based point of view in the first place. But then when you go into that synchronous communication mode, when you're engaging in those video calls, try and make them as rich as possible. So where you can and where it makes sense in terms of bandwidth and the environment that you're working in, have your video on just for those short bursts where you want to actually engage with people in that conversation, and have a rich level of discourse or conversation about a decision that you're making as well. Then the final principle is about transparently documenting your work as you go. We really think you think like a journalist in this digital way of working, and some people might call this working out loud or things like that. I'm just on a live call with people around Australia. Is it all right if you come back in a second? Excellent, thank you. One of the great joys of working from home as well is keeping those work-life borders together, which we can talk about another time. Transparently documenting your work as you go. So for this one, think like a journalist. So the one thing that I know for myself, my own personal practice, is if I do something and I talk about something and make a decision, but then I come back 48 hours later and try and remember what that was or try and communicate that to someone else, I've lost the richness of what that was. And I can't communicate it as effectively if I could 5 minutes or 10 minutes after that conversation occurred. So you want to make sure that you're documenting your decisions, your conversations as you go. If you're leading with a text-based approach first, that happens automatically. But if you're having conversations, make sure you're going back into the Teams channel and saying, hey, I just had a chat with Mark and these are the outcomes we got to, and these are the actions that are coming out of that, and making sure that you've got that all there. Again, the other thing with that journalist mindset is that there's really great examples of amazing work that's happening right now. That people are, they're solving real world problems. They're bringing really innovative and novel solutions to things in your organizations and across other organizations. If you're capturing those stories and sharing them with other people, going back to something that I think Mark had on his slide as well, we love to hear from our co-workers in terms of how we can learn and solve problems. So capturing those stories and sharing those stories with your peers means that everyone's kind of leveling up and you're raising the tide of digital literacy or digital fluency in this distributed work world of work as well. I'm conscious that, again, I've been talking for a little bit and we're well and truly running probably a little bit over time. I've got a little bit more detail here I could go through on each of those points, but I'm going to skip that because I just talked about it. The key things that I think, key takeaways that I want you to know from this. So I just finished research with the QUT Business School, the Work Futures Research Group. And we looked at technology-enabled mobile work and the porosity of work-life borders, and like how do we can basically, how do we do technology-enabled work that allows us to work from anywhere when we've got a supercomputer in our pocket and all those other kinds of things? How do we make sure that we actually still remain effective as a worker, but also still maintain a good, work, a life outside of work as well? And the key finding out of all of that, and there's 40,000 words, I can go into more detail about it, but there's one really key takeaway from this. And we didn't even plan for this to occur, but the fact that we had the forming, storming, norming slide earlier in the presentation, because it relates basically to that, is that for managers, if you're a manager of a team, your expectations on your team members, whether they're the real expectations you have or the perceived expectations of your team members, will have the greatest impact on how your team operates in this new world of work. All right, so it's not about the technology, it's not about the job design necessarily, or the job title, or the job spec that you've got. It's not about the customers you engage with or the stakeholders you engage with. The thing that we had the biggest impact on the success or otherwise of people trying to work and not be overwhelmed in this new world of work and maintaining some kind of strength in their work-life borders came down to the expectations of their direct manager and how they perceive those expectations. So if you're a manager of a team, the advice that we give you is that you need to sit down with your team and you need to have that forming, storming, norming conversation with your team. Now, we are in a different context now. We are in a new world of work at the moment, particularly now. And the way that we thought about things in the past are not the same as what they are in the future or today. So if you haven't had this conversation as a team, you need to sit down and have this conversation right now, because it'll solve your whole heap of pain down the track of burnout and overwork and people tending to go from their 7 hours 36 they used to do in the office to 9 hours or 10 hours or 11 hours because they don't have that ritual of a commute to kind of break their day up or anything anymore. So that's for managers, and then as a direct report, your interpretation of your team's expectations equally has a great impact on that as well. So again, the advice I'd say is start having a conversation with your peers, start having a conversation with your manager about expectations and being really clear. Like my wife is working from home, my kids are doing school from home, and I'm trying to do a video call across Australia. As a leader, like I know that's going to happen with my team when I'm working with them as well. So we kind of say, hey, that's okay. We just work through it and get through it. In other organizations, that would be almost a sackable offense, depending on, like in the old world, right? So you need to be really clear about resetting these expectations based on the context that we're operating in at the moment. I'm actually really interested to stop talking now and kind of go into the Q&A bit. I've got a few more slides here in terms of designing a perfect team in Microsoft Teams for distributed work. I'll let you in on a little secret. It's our 10 Ps of Microsoft Teams design framework. It's in the book. So if you want to go into any more detail around this, it's basically a nice common language you can use to describe, starting with a problem or a business opportunity, how to structure the perfect team related to that. grab it in the book, get on Audible, get mine instead of Malcolm Turnbull's book. It's going to be much better and shorter and better use of your Audible subscription. But the one thing I wanted to point out before I hand over to the interactive part of the workshop, with the book comes a bit of an interactive worksheet where you can actually fill in all the bits that you need to do to design the team as well. So if you're sitting there struggling to articulate how to design a perfect team with someone in your organization, or you're struggling to articulate how to design a team for yourself for a particular problem that you're solving, we've got a step-by-step workbook you can use. That's all Creative Commons licensed, so you can use that inside your organization as well, even if you don't buy the book. But if you do get value out of it, we'd love you to buy the book as well. Maybe I'll leave this next slide up because it might be a good talking point for the Q&A side of the conversation, I guess, because I'm really keen to hear what everyone else on the call is struggling with. What are the challenges you've tried to work through over the last little while? Some of the things that our customers are focusing on at the moment, it's council meetings outside of council chambers, so like virtual delivery of physical, things that occur in our real lives. We've got a customer in Victoria that's doing telephysio for the first time using Teams. So, getting family members to do manipulations with patients because they can't actually go and visit them face to face, and simple exercises and things like that. How do you structure simple templates for team leaders and managers just to switch across to, a more distributed way of working, broadcasting updates to staff all at once. We've got a live event coming up next week, which will be, 10,000, potentially 15,000 participants. So we're seeing lots of those one-to-many kind of broadcast scenarios coming up. Organizations that have been running on VPN and network shares for so long, basically saying, how do we flatten the curve on the VPN? Because we only really scoped it for 5% of the workforce to work from home at once, and now we've got 95% of the workforce that need access to those files. Education customers where 95% of their revenue has just stopped overnight and needing to transition to digital delivery almost instantly. And my favorite was the Director General of Education in Paraguay asking us how to deploy Teams to 1.2 million students in 15 days. And that one there was just hold on and go for the ride. I think that was getting there. But I think with that, I'd love to kind of hand back for more of the panel discussion side of things. But I think from my point of view, I'd love to hear what people are struggling with at the moment, or where people are see the challenges that they're facing over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And maybe as a panel, we can potentially help some people on the call overcome some of those things as well. So thanks, everyone. And back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think that's probably a good point to start off with around any challenges that people are facing at the moment. I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump in and yell out, or if you want to pop anything in the chat maybe, and then we can talk a little bit more specifically to that. Otherwise, we'll just kind of open it up for a bit more of a broader conversation. And I'm not sure if Sharon, if you have any specific questions you maybe want to grill some of our presenters with.
Well, there was
we'll go from there.
One earlier from Rick. And Rick, I don't know if you want to jump in and ask this about your community of practices and forums. Would they be better to be on Yammer rather than on Teams? Laurie, if Rick, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, Laurie, do you want to answer that question for Rick?
No, I can jump in if you like.
Oh, thank you.
So I just had to remember to unmute the microphone. We're a firm of consultants, and we often play sort of wide of each other anyway, because we're often at different client engagements and that sort of thing. So we've had Yammer around. I've been pushing for this sort of thing for the last 2 or 3 years amongst the consultancy, and it's slowly but surely getting some traction. Obviously, the last few weeks have assisted immensely, but it's just that, and the way I've sort of seen it is, although I was using other tools and still use other tools like Slack and Trello and things like that with other organizations, with other sets of teams, if you like, we're a Microsoft shop in this consultancy, so Teams and Yammer were sort of the easy steps to take because they were already part of the Office 365 subscription. And so, but we've tended to work it so that we're using Teams for, like, we'll set up a team for a client engagement, and we'll invite people to that team who are involved in the engagement, sometimes involve people from the client as well in that team. And Yammer, we've sort of, we have communities, and that's where we've tended to use it for sort of more general discussions, communities of practice, swapping ideas and swapping information, that sort of thing. I was just sort of wanting to confirm that that's actually not a bad separation of the two tools, if you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to defer to Paul because I actually tell his story that he told to us, so But I must say that the
Sorry, was that one? Sorry, which one?
Yeah, this is a Yammer versus Teams thing. But I think
yeah.
you related your own personal, and I think Sharon talked about Naomi's and that. But what I can say from an analytic perspective, in doing cultural mapping for Yammer and Teams, there's no doubt that Teams is very much an operational, hierarchically driven sort of style of operating culture, and Yammer is very much more into the innovation community sort of space. So the data is definitely telling us this, but I think the colour could probably be better provided by people that are actually sort of living that space, and of course we do too. But Paul had a good way of describing it, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, we use both tools, both Yammer and Teams, in our daily practice. Before Teams came along, Yammer was what we were trying to use as a platform we could engage with customers as well. So we had external groups in Yammer and having it all in that one spot. But what I love about having the two tools to make it work for us is it allows us as a group to manage our energy throughout the day and where we want to focus our attention throughout the day. And I think about this less from a what is the easiest thing to manage from an IT point of view, and more from a how do we actually be more effective as a team, and how do we effectively engage with our customers and things like that. So we think about it from this point of view. So Teams is a place where I want to get caught in the flow of work. Like I want to go into Teams and I want to focus on that one thing that I'm focusing on at the time. And that's why we kind of say more teams is better than fewer teams, because it allows us to get so laser focused on that particular bit of work or that customer or that project that we're working on at a particular time. And Teams, we have the ability to bring our external customers in, and we have plenty of external teams where we have customers working with us in that particular space, and we hope that they get lost in the flow of work if we're working with them as well. But we keep Teams 100% work focused for that reason, because we want to get caught in that flow of work. And then Yammer is where we talk about like how we work together as an organization. It's almost like the meta conversation around the work, where we can think about values and how we want to work together, and learning, and things that need improving, and other bits and pieces that aren't really going to get us caught into they're going to distract us from the flow of work. The beauty of that is like I can be working on a customer in the morning and I go, right, I'm sick and tired of working on that customer. I just minimize that in Teams and then switch back to Yammer, and I can have reset my brain and my focus, because I'm thinking about something that's completely different. It's not particularly customer related. And having that second place to kind of switch to, so having Yammer as a place I can go to and then back to Yammer, and having that switching between, it gives us the ability to transition those different mindsets. Yes, it could look overwhelming for people that come in and look at it without the context of how we do it. But I know that like I can open up in the morning. I've got 3 notifications in Teams because we've set some really clear ground rules in terms of principles we want to work with. So we only tag people in messages if I actually want them to take some kind of time-bound action. It's not a case of just tagging someone if they want to see a message replied to or not. So we've kind of worked through all those things, and it works really well. There's a little bit of dip to get through to get to that point, and you need to get everyone on the same page. It comes back to that one thing I talked about before, which is expectations. But again, having those different spaces can work quite well. But for me, it's not about trying to have it all in one tool. It's about how do we just think about the structure of work and how we want to engage with our customers, and what will make it easier for my team and our team to actually focus their effort and their energy onto the stuff they need to focus it on at any one time.
Yep. So I guess the short answer is I think you're doing the right thing.
That's what I was taking away too. No, that's a good experience, Paul. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no worries at all.
There's another, I guess, more of a comment from Simon. If Simon Rawson wants to jump in, he's talking about, and maybe you guys can give him some direction here. The biggest challenge is the confusion people face trying to go up the learning curve with both Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and do it all at the same time.
I'm helping them, an organisation of 1,500 people roll out Office 365 from a very low base. And of course, everyone's remote working. So trying to come up with a set of governance standards and information architecture and set of practices, work practices, is pretty hard. But the single most confusing thing for people is the challenge of being faced with what appears to be complex user interfaces and functions that are similar but different. And so anyone who's managed to do it really successfully or effectively, I'd love to hear some comments.
Yeah. So this is there's a whole hour and a half on this topic, but I think at the end of the day, Teams is where people can go and find or spin up documents for their actual teamwork. That's the sort of starting point, and it is harder to govern. But St John's Ambulance, as just talked about, they use their SharePoint as their sort of source, their intranet as their source. So now, obviously, you're spinning up SharePoint documents when you're doing things with Teams and what have you, but they actually have the official policies. They have they have structure around the things that are in SharePoint. And I think when people sort of you communicate things where they can actually they can just have a go at doing things in Teams, have a go at doing things in Yammer, put things where others can find, and not be too worried about, is this the final most important official word? Does this have customer information or what have you? And yet then you can formalize just those things that you need to formalize that actually flow through to SharePoint, which is getting easier, but it confuses people. I mean, OneDrive is great, but it's an improvement if you're not putting on a on a C drive. But you've still got to. The danger is that people aren't actually working out what we call working out loud or collaborating around the creation of documents when they're just putting things on their OneDrive.
I was going to say, I've probably got a perspective on that as well, Simon. I think the key thing here is that you want to ground it in stuff that people are already familiar with. So it's actually less about the technology. It's less about launching Teams, launching OneDrive, launching Office 365. And it's about, we're running our committee meetings better, or we're, how we do this customer engagement, or how we're going to run the facilities of the university, or how we're going to, things that I'm already familiar with, business processes or work practices that we're already familiar with. Because it's very easy for people to understand. All right, I understand the process. I understand because I have to do that already today. What I want to understand now is how this technology can help improve or streamline or accelerate or reduce the cost of that particular process. So it's less about telling people about the 50 things Teams can do and the 30 things we can do in OneDrive and the 12 things we can do in Planner and all that kind of stuff, and going, well, actually, we've just got a process here, which is a meeting process or something like that. And the agenda process we're going to do this way, and the tracking of the actions we're going to do that way. We've found that in pretty much every organization that we've taken that approach and kind of recommended that approach, the wholesale adoption, if you're measuring it by active users, may not be as much, because not everyone's trying to try every technology, but the outcomes or the impact of that work is far more significant. And the best part about that is if it's already in something that's already measured, you can actually measure the improvement of it as well. So you can go back to the steering committee or the board and wrote the business case in the first place and say, this we actually got real business outcomes from this, from a quantitative and a qualitative point of view as well.
Yeah, I think what's working the best out of what's confusing for most people, though, is behind the scenes, we set up an information architecture with the appropriate libraries and SharePoint, and then had them sync the libraries or relevant folders that they're primarily working on back to OneDrive. So given that they were used to working from a file share as the starting point, that's replicating that experience. And we're focused, as you've suggested, Paul, I think, thanks for that advice there, focusing on some core processes and using that as a means to take them secretly up the learning curve. If they can do one function consistently and well, then they can take those key things. It's I have to say, people are a heck of a lot more adaptable than I think most managements give them credit for.
Very true.
Well, if we've got time for one more quick question, Melina, I don't know whether you want to jump in. Again, it's more of a comment, but you're saying that you're using Teams, but you're just finding it's getting too noisy. There's too much chatter in Teams. Some of that would probably be better served on Yammer. I'm guessing you're talking more like company-wide chatter than rather your company-wide chatter that's on Teams rather than your day-to-day work that could be used on Teams, whereas that company-wide chatter could be on Yammer. Do you want to jump in, Melina?
Yes, that's correct. I'm finding that Teams to me is more about what we're doing day-to-day, collaborating, working with our clients, working with our workload, what we want to do. But what I'm finding is there's just way too much chatter. Oh, how are you feeling today? What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. It's getting a bit out of control. I looked at Yammer quite a few years ago and I didn't like the way it was set up. So we didn't push through, and no one else liked it neither. So we didn't actually go that next step and actually launch it through the whole practice. But now listening to all of you guys today, it seems more reasonable to actually try and separate the chatter and the work by using Teams for working and Yammer more for that conversation, what did you do on the weekend or whatever.
Yeah, I think that no doubt that chat is an easy way to go in initially, and to get in and just start chatting on Teams is and everyone is doing that. But I think that I guess the commentary I had, and certainly the others on the panel know more about this than me from a contextual point of view, that yeah, people have jumped onto chat very quickly, and it's easy. And of course, if you're not in the habits of knowing how to control your notifications, which doesn't come in default, I'm sure the people on other people on the call can help you do that. The clear feedback we got was that even though most of the messages were chat, they were not really, they weren't really important things. And in fact, the feedback I got was, because I said I wouldn't mind analysing the chat, and a lot of people came back and said, well, it's only peripheral rubbish. The stuff you should look at is the stuff that's being done in the threaded discussions and so forth, which can happen in Teams and in Yammer. And I still think chat from a personal perspective, seeing who's trying to chat with who. When we've done research on chat before Teams, we found that very much chat was very much like email, and you tended to chat with people that are local to you. Now, the chat that's annoying you, I'm not sure whether that's coming from people that are close to you, or whether somehow the sort of structure that you have, you get everybody's chat message, whoever's maybe you've got one of these. I don't know. I don't know what your situation is, but usually if the chat's coming from people that you're working with at a day-to-day basis, you can probably tolerate that. But if it's somebody else's chat, that's just peripheral, it's just annoying, so. If anyone else in the panel, and you guys sort of know, I think, Paul, you know how to control your notifications, because you told me you were
just turn them all off.
Everyone
else's important thing is not my important thing necessarily,
exactly.
So that's why I turn off. I think a great way to sum up that situation, Melina. So Nick Shelton, who's the HR manager at Amart Furniture, used this term, and I just love it. He says, Yammer's our culture platform. We don't do work there, it's our culture platform. And that's where we want to bring our people together, engage in the community. And like Microsoft's going to take this more community focused labeling of Yammer groups now, and I think it's perfect. But it's really about how do you connect people and ideas and experiences together and build a digital place for that culture to thrive. And then Teams is where we can get work done. I think that's a really great way to think about it for them.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think that's our time, is it? Or who's?
Well, we don't have a limit, but I think I think that's been great.
So, are you closing it, Emily, or are you still around, or are you?
I'm still here. I'm still here, don't worry. Yeah, I guess we'll close out now, but if there are any extra questions, I guess you could also just keep popping them in the chat there, and we'll make sure we share some answers with you after this session. Of course, this session was recorded, and we can make sure that we share some of the slide packs that we ran through today as well, if you want to have a look at those in a bit more depth, or if you want to share any of the content with any colleagues that may also be interested in some of the stuff that we covered today. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. I know we got through a lot, didn't we? And thank you
or if there's
to
any
our
other
presenters
topics
as well.
Yeah, any topics that people are interested in being addressed in the future, I think, yes, pop them in the chat. I mean, that's what chat's useful for. And I guess we can certainly try and address those. But okay, well, let's close it off. Thanks for your attendance.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, that's been awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Stay safe. See you all soon.
See you.